Cadence POV.
The litter on my desk looked like a pile of black and white ink morphing into one another, with some lying idly on the table and a few stacked in envelopes or files. I stared at the monitor screen blankly, watching the blues and reds become an ugly color that irritated me to no end. Slowly, I pushed the keyboard further from the edge of the table and recoiled into the executive chair. Everything bothered me, so much that I couldn't focus on one thing at a time. Mostly because I hadn't heard from the Gemini in days, it was getting frustrating. I glanced up at the wall clock that stood just above the door frame and felt the frown lines form on my forehead. It was barely 3 p.m., yet it felt like I'd been sitting there for a million hours. I brought my index fingers to my temples, rubbing in circular motions. As if on cue, there was a small ring on my table coming from my phone. I picked up the phone, glancing at the caller ID. It was Jacob. It didn't surprise me, however. Joshua would never call. I would be surprised if he even had a phone. My lord, my apologies for not providing an update. It has been hectic trying to blend in here. I hissed quietly, scrunching my face. The fuck you are? I'm trying not to get caught, my lord. I could sense a sarcastic smile plastered on his face. The nerve. Then spill. What's happening over there? Honestly, everything is the same as it was when we arrived here. Neil is my cover name. I don't care about your fucking aliases, Jacob. Get to the bloody point. I snapped at him, pinching my nostrils before propping myself upright. Hunching ever so slightly, I leaned with my elbows on the busy desk. The security at the pack house is incredibly tight. The Luna hasn't been going out much, however she seems to have a suitor who keeps coming here. They drink wine and discuss nothing but politics and the well-being of her cub. Politics? Yes, and you wouldn't believe who her suitor is. Isn't he some kind of weak-ass alpha? Negative, my lord. It's Nick. He doesn't recognize me and Joshua, or at least he pretends not to. I had to dye my hair a blonde. Kill that son of a bitch! I growled loudly and shot up from my seat so abruptly that I knocked over a vase on my desk. Nick? That bastard still lived? He had some fucking nerve to go after one of my allies. My blood boiled at the mention of his name. All I wanted to do was to beat him into a bloody pile and shove him into a furnace to burn while he was still breathing. We're undercover. I can't do that. I found myself slowly taking my seat again, breathing heavily to restrain from sending something flying into the window. Jacob was right. Besides, I would rather he died by my hands, pleading for mercy. Very well, then. I forced out and hung up the call. Running one hand through my hair, I fell back into the seat yet again. This wouldn't do. There was no way in hell I could focus on the pile of work on my desk. There was a soft rap on my desk at that moment, before the knob was twisted and pushed inside. Sir. It was Hunter in a 45-degree bow before he staggered to an upright position. I cocked a brow at him, still irritated. You'd better have a good reason to walk into my office without waiting for instructions. I'm sorry, but there's a meeting with the Fort Group. His voice was bland, and as much as I liked its occasional absence of emotions, I hated it in times like this. Fucking humans. I muttered under my breath, darting around my desk before shifting my attention back to him. Tell them I'm not available. If they're so desperate to seal a deal, they can book an appointment for Monday. I could see the most minute twitch in his eyes right before he gave an affirming nod. Oh, and I'm returning early. So, tidy up the office and report to me this evening. He nodded again before walking out of the office, leaving me to my thoughts again. I rose to my feet and picked up the beige coat I'd worn to the office that morning. Throwing some files into my black suitcase, I tossed the coat over my body before making my way out of the office and its building. The drive back to the mansion was excruciating. I couldn't stand having a driver today. I'll be so tempted to rip his head off. It didn't help that as soon as I'd swerved the SUV past the last turn to where the mansion stood, the skies thought it beat to unleash their tears in heavy droplets. It was raining without the warning of graying skies, or perhaps I hadn't noticed. I gripped the steering wheel, letting out a hiss before revving the car through the towering gates. There was a guard running up to me with an umbrella in his hands almost immediately, smiling. What should have been welcoming was so fucking irritating. He held out the umbrella as I alighted the SUV and pulled out the suitcase, trailing just behind me as I made my way to the entrance with heavy steps worse than the droplets of rain. I recognized Gwendolyn standing at the foot of the stairs with a blend of awe and confusion written on her face. I could care less, however, than to be bothered by a mere maid. She took very careful steps to where I stood in the middle of the room, halting a few feet from me before bowing lightly. "Where's my son?" "He's sleeping, my lord. He's had quite a day." "You're quite early. How was work today?" I cocked a brow at her. She had some guts, the kind of guts that Larissa had to dare to talk to me when every other person would shit themselves. Now my thoughts had gone back to the very woman I'd sworn to erase from my mind, although it was proving to be a pain in the ass. I glared back at her, shaking off the few water droplets that had landed on my jacket on my way inside. Then, with a slight nod of disapproval, I walked past her up the stairs. I would rather just force myself to the study and handle things that actually mattered. I twisted the doorknob, surprised when it popped open immediately. It wasn't locked. I couldn't remember vividly if I'd locked it or I'd just forgotten in my disoriented state of mind that morning. Thinking better of it, I pushed inside. Almost immediately, I could catch the faint whiff of roses, more addictive than anything my nostrils had ever caught. It was soft and magnetic, pulling me even further into the room. The grip on my suitcase had loosened considerably as I continued into the room. I glanced at the window sill first with nothing else in my field of view before turning to see an unexpected figure in the room. She was wiping down at my dressing table with delicate movements. The small dress that she wore moved along with her hands and pulled it up ever so slightly so I could see her. Fuck it, I could see the outline of her body. The petite coat of skin that laid beneath her ivory dress, even the nape of her neck when she gently moved her non-pigmented ponytail to the side. She was something I couldn't comprehend. She was enchanting in the oddest ways. Did a being such as this live under my roof? I couldn't will my legs to stop as I took small steps towards her, towering over her petite figure and watching her hands stiffen before turning back so quickly that it came as a surprise that she didn't snap her neck in the process. There was barely any distance between us, too little for comfort and just enough to steady her exotic features. Her deep brown doe eyes caught mine, staring in surprise when I brought a hand to the stray hairs on her face. She flinched and flipped her eyes shut, and slowly realization set in. That shy Omega presence, the blonde hair that were an almost golden color, her round cheeks, fuck you, Caden, I thought to myself with a mental facepalm. What are you doing in my room? I let out lowly with a scowl, feeling the tingle on my skin worsen with anger. How dare she come to my room? The nerve. You don't recognize your place, no? She flinched again and slowly fluttered her eyes open. Don't take it the wrong way. Her voice cracked at the end of her filtered words. I'm just doing my job. What? She waved the tablecloth in her hand, and my face and took a few steps back till she was completely backed up against the table. I could sense the irritation in her demeanor. I'm cleaning. Your job is to take care of my son. I snapped, growing more irritated at the fact that the scent was hers. It was pulling me in again, making my wolf dance around, and it was pissing me off. And be your housekeeper. She corrected painfully, biting her upper lip. Your room is so dusty, and you made it clear that you hated the dust. Besides, it doesn't look like your room has been cleaned much since you locked me up either, so are you stopping me from doing the job you assigned to me? Subconsciously, I closed the distance between us in slow steps. I saw her gulp and look away, supporting her weight by placing both hands on the table. I rested my hands just inches away from her, leaning in and reveling in her now vulnerable state. You dare talk back at me, Larissa? Did you forget that you're just a fucking servant? Your life belongs to me, did you forget that? There was silence in the room. She didn't say a word, she didn't even spare me a glance. Up close, she was doing things to me that I'd sworn would never happen. It was the first time I was so up close with another woman, yet the feeling was all too familiar and I was doing a horrible job at deterring her from thinking she had a chance with me. Only now did I notice the small black mark just below her plum lips and how long her soft brown eyelashes were. I noticed her lips twitching and her large eyes for the first time. Her nostrils flared and I mimicked her actions without thinking. She smelled so nice. Just perfect. I heard Peter, my wolf as clear as the skies in the morning. I could smell something adulterating in the mix. It was no longer just roses. It was the scent of wood and freshly cut grasses, but it blended so well with the roses. I sniffed around, leaning even further to hover over her neck where her pheromones were strongest when I realized nobody was mowing my lawn. It was me. The mix was me, and I was certain that she had noticed. I staggered back immediately on realization, clearing my throat awkwardly. As if on cue, her eyes flew open. They were the most unreadable irises. Her pupils were constricted, and she was now staring right back at me. What the fuck was I doing? Leave my room. I'll have someone else clean it. I ground out in the harshest way possible, fighting an internal battle to calm down and restrict my pheromones before the newfound and growing tightness in my pants would worsen. Now. Her lips were parted slightly, but there were no words to escape them. With a nod, she picked up the tablecloth that had fallen somewhere in between my pathetic stare and practically ran out of the room. I let out a sharp breath I didn't even realize I had been holding, plopping onto the bed as soon as I heard the door shut. I could also hear Peter's scoff drowned out by what had just happened. What the fuck just happened, Caden? You've let yourself go too far, way too far. She must never cross the line, yet I was the one who crossed the line today.
Larissa's POV.
I still remembered the shivers that peppered my skin so lightly that I may have lost my footing if I hadn't been backed up and trapped. I remembered the strong scent of what I couldn't even precisely describe and his feathery breaths against the skin of my neck, and I wish I could smack myself for being unable to do anything about it. If anything, I liked it a little too much. For the first time, I saw his eyes brighten and the ring around his irises focusing entirely on me. I saw his thick eyebrows raise and his lips part, his breath showering my skin deliciously. I wanted to smack myself for feeling so vulnerable when he was so close to me. A few days had passed since that day, yet I couldn't get the sensation out of my system. For a moment, I found myself believing that somehow, just maybe he was attracted to me. My body responded in weird ways that I had no control over. When was the last time? My wedding night? Still, I was confused. He always made it clear that he didn't want anything to do with me. He called me names, imprisoned me for no reason, and used even the slightest opportunity to taunt me. Yet he did that. Was he attracted to me? Was he going back on his words? What if he saw me different? Get a hold of yourself. I shook my head in disagreement. There was no way in hell he would let himself be attracted to me, no matter how much he raised my hopes. And it stung when somewhere deep down, I wanted to believe that he had even the slightest attraction for me. I shook my head again, shaking off the excess water on my hands in the sink. The cleaned-out dishes sat by the counter, patiently waiting to be dried before they were hung up. I picked up a dry tablecloth and wiped them down quickly before patting my hands on the blue apron hanging loosely around my waist. I remembered that the living room was yet to be cleaned that afternoon. They had been cleaned right before I took Declan to kindergarten, but with the first rains came an awful amount of dust that put all of my hard work to shame. The Alpha was still in the house, and it was only a matter of time before he yelled out my name to put his mansion in order. I made my way to the janitor's room to pick up some cleaning supplies and continued to the living room to clean. Just as I'd expected, the marble sculpts in the room were as if I hadn't touched them in a week. Even the coffee table had a thin film of dust layering the glass. I dragged the buckets to the table before dipping the tablecloth in water and soap, then wiped it swiftly across the table before spritzing it and wiping down again. I finished cleaning a few minutes later and picked up my bucket in the direction of the back exit, but the sounds of hushed speaking piqued my curiosity. They were loud enough for them to be heard, but not loud enough to cause a ruckus or for me to make out the context of their speaking. I stopped, instead turning till I was standing in front of the ever-familiar room. The same room where Annalise had claimed that I would lose my life without notifying the Alpha beforehand. The door was ajar, startling me. It was usually either locked or simply shut. But it was open, and a pair of emerald eyes were staring blankly at me. I couldn't tell if he was mad at me for appearing from nowhere, or he was simply indifferent. My head told me it had to be the former. I coughed awkwardly, seeing as his stare didn't falter in the least. I felt uncomfortable, as though there were a fleet of ants crawling on my skin. It was the first time I was seeing him since that day. I realized I had been avoiding him since then, whether I liked it or not. I suddenly remembered his displeased face when he asked me to leave that day, and it was beginning to hurt all over again. I brought my eyes to look at him again before looking away. Letting out small ragged breaths, I forced myself to walk away from the door to his study. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't let him mess with me when he didn't give a care in the world. Stop. One word. One word only, and I halted in my tracks. I had barely even taken a step, yet my body stopped on its own with one word from him. In all honesty, I was more afraid of what he would do to me if I dared to disobey him than what would happen now that I listened to him. Come here, he continued, motioning for me to go into the study with a hand gesture. I swallowed, awkwardly pointing at myself before finally pushing the door open. I didn't realize that he had some visitors over. They were sitting with their backs facing the door, but they turned around as soon as they heard the creaking of the door as I pushed it open. I could recognize the Alpha's beta, Hunter, with his permanent poker face. He looked at me for a brief moment before looking away. The third person, I had no idea who he was. He appeared like a more sinister version of Killian, with his hair styled in a brilliant platinum middle part that showed his forehead. His brows were dark, however, arching deep enough for him to be a mean taskmaster. But the corners of his lips were lifted in a sly smirk in a way that complemented his square jaw, and his blue eyes were almost hooded by his eyelids. He had the mischief I always saw when I was captured, and his entire demeanor was off-putting. I stood there awkwardly, shifting my weight from one foot to the other when the Alpha wouldn't say anything. I was looking anywhere but where he sat, recoiled in his seat with his hair tousled in many directions. He sat up as if on cue, his eyes falling into a hood. I didn't know what I found attractive about that. He looked like a bloody psychopath. Get me a bottle of Domaine Leroy Richburg Grand Cru and glasses for 3. You know what that is, right? He finally spoke up, the rich timbre of his velvety voice resonating through the room. I was certain that it only had that effect on me, however, which made it all the more embarrassing. I wanted to scoff at his assumptions. Was he mocking me with the belief that I had no idea what brand of wine he was referring to? I simply nodded rather than throw a cheeky response and looked around. I didn't realize he had a minibar in his study as well. I let out a small whiff of air and walked up to where the bar stood, rummaging it quickly for the bottle he'd asked of. Picking up the glasses as well, I set them onto a bronze tray and carefully set the entire tray on the desk. I noticed the blonde-haired man staring at me as I made my way to place the tray on the table. It was uncomfortable for me to the point where it felt like my dress had ridden up past my thigh. I shifted my attention to the Alpha, who was still staring at me with the blankiest eyes. Did he already forget what happened that day? Damn, Caden, you've got a fine one. The blonde slurred and recoiled into his seat. I whipped my head around sharply to look at him, straightening up immediately. He was still smirking at me before he leaned in to look at the Alpha. Do you mind me having this one? I promise I'll return her later tonight. She's my housekeeper, you bastard. Oh, come on. Just one night, Caden. What do I bring in exchange? Diamonds? Pearls? A few $1,000? I heard Hunter cough awkwardly before pouring himself a drink. You're so shameless, Dolph. Disgusted wasn't enough to describe how I felt in my own skin. How dare he objectify me like that? There's nothing you can do about it, Larissa. You're a miserable Omega working in the mansion of your own maid who doesn't want you as a housekeeper. You think you're worth anything? If anything, the man whose name I understood was Dolph snickered back and smirked even wider. What good comes from being ashamed, Hunter? I want something. I think it's sexy, I go for it. I will not entertain your sexual fantasies, Dolph. So, shut it. Alpha Caden snapped, finally, and I stepped back, grateful that he said something in my defense. The man cackled again. Why so stubborn? It's not like you want her either. Shut the fuck up if you do not want me to declare war on your pack and annihilate everything. Trust me, you know I'm more than capable of destroying you. I saw his fangs lengthen in the slightest. It was almost unnoticeable, but any wolf could see that he was so close to blowing up. Dolph chuckled awkwardly, running his hands through his hair. And no. I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean to upset you or anything. I warned you a million times not to sexualize any Omega in my pack without their consent, let alone in my presence. He snorted back, propping himself to sit up and squared his shoulders. The next time you pull a stunt like this, I swear I'll use your skin as decoration for my weapons room. I felt my heart swell when the man backed away, almost sulking. I looked up to meet the Alpha's eyes, but he was still fixed on Dolph. I'd never been protected from sexualization like this before. If anything, I've always been tossed to the middle like an artifact for anybody to see or touch. I couldn't help but see him in a new light, the one who still cared about the people in his house despite his mean personality. Perhaps something had happened to him to make him the way he was. Aren't you going to pour the glass? His gruff voice startled me from my trance, forcing me to blink back to reality. He was back to his blank stare without uttering a word. I bit back a smile and reached out for the glass, careful not to brush the man that still ogled me before pouring out the glasses and refilling that of the Alpha's right-hand man. You can leave now, he finished after reaching for his glass and sipping on it ever so slowly. He was twirling the glass in his hands, motioning silently for me to leave the study. I simply nodded and returned to the door where I had abandoned my cleaning supplies, picking them before walking out of the door. I wanted to look back and smile at him, and even thank him for standing up for me, but decided against it. I didn't think he would appreciate it, seeing as he didn't even break the smallest smirk. I stood against the door, instead smiling sheepishly to myself. Part of me was glad for what he did, yet a part of me couldn't get over him kicking me out like that night. I shouldn't let myself be swayed by his gestures. He already said he didn't want anything to do with me, so I shouldn't read subtle meanings into his actions. I wasn't going to lie, it was bloody difficult.
Larissa's POV.
Declan dear, Declan. Wait up! I was already out of breath. Why was it that a toddler as little as this child would outrun me every single time? He was giggling and running up the stairs without even looking back, and no matter how much I tried to catch up with him, he was always one step ahead of me. Or several, I couldn't count how many times I had stumbled already on the stairs with Gwen right behind me. He had said he wanted to play something fun. I didn't realize that the idea of fun I'd instilled in him involved me running around like my life depended on it in a bid to tag a child. For the first time, I was grateful to have put my hair up in a bun. I stopped in front of a pair of French doors that I'd never crossed before. It was upstairs as well, only that I've been too busy struggling to keep my job to actually tour around the house. Declan had already run through the door while I stood there panting and gasping to catch my breath. This child will be the death of me. Gwen coughed out, pushing the door open slowly. I followed her through the door, only now noticing the refined architecture. It was a tall balcony with its pillars crafted with what was reminiscent of Italian architecture. There were some exotic flower pots littered spaciously, subtly reminding me of home. I loved that the weather was particularly fresh, although I couldn't tell if it was the weather itself or the sweet-smelling flowers. Slowly, I noticed the figure standing in middle with his back facing us. Declan was at his side, clinging to one strong leg whose muscles peeked from the pair of sweats he wore. He turned around when the boy held his legs and wouldn't let go. There was a glass of wine in his hand. I saw his arms flex with the glass when he saw the boy. It was the Alpha standing there without all of the regality, instead clean-shaven and embodying his casual flair. "Declan, what are you doing here?" He cooed at the toddler, scooping him swiftly so that they were standing at similar heights. I saw him break a toothy smile for his son, running a hand through his hair and smiling a little wider when Declan leaned into his touch. Now that I thought of it, I'd never seen him smile. Not at me, not at the guards, not at his visitors, not even at his beta. I'd subconsciously wired myself to believe that he could never break a smile for any being, but here he was proving me wrong with the most beautiful smile I may see in this lifetime. I had to admit that he looked amazing. Regardless of the smiles, he was always an eye candy. But with a genuine smile gracing his lips, he looked like a protective father who would do anything for his cub. And his mate if he didn't hate her so much. Declan was babbling at this point, wielding one of his wooden knives in his father's face and smiling to himself. I could see him stifle a laugh when the boy shoved his small hands through his father's hair, and I couldn't help but stifle one of my own. "You look a lot happier lately," I blurted out before I could catch myself. He finally noticed the other people in the room, and I saw the beam on his face slightly falter at that. Gwen turned to look at me, and if eyes could speak, hers said, "You're screwed." Contrary to my expectations, he didn't say anything. Instead, he set Declan down and shifted his attention to the sea of nothingness in front of us. For more than 5 minutes, I stood there awkwardly staring at nothing as well. Gwen had picked up Declan after his father had set him down and had taken him outside. Yet I couldn't allow myself to leave like I should have. I walked to the edge of the balcony where he had set down his half-empty glass. His fingers ran over the rim of the glass with his eyes transfixed on it before letting out a small sigh. "What are you still doing here? Shouldn't you be getting busy?" I was certain that he intended to be harsh with me, but there was no undertone. His voice was betraying whatever emotion he'd meant to put on display. I let out a small titter at that, crossing my arms behind me. I lied back then. "I know it's not in my place to say, and you hate me. But you look more worried than happy lately." He cocked a brow and shifted his attention from the glass and to me. "So, if it isn't in your place, you know you're clearly sweating your grace." "I'm sorry, but I couldn't help but notice." I continued and looked away from him, reveling in the feeling of the soft breeze blowing against my face. "Keep your observation to yourself," he snapped back with a visible frown. I didn't kill his son, he was looking at me like he would rip me into shreds. Even if somehow, I knew he wouldn't. I chuckled instead and placed my elbows to rest on the smooth edges. "It'll be resolved, I just know it." "Excuse me?" "What you're worried about," I pointed out with a small smile. "I don't know what it is, perhaps work or something more serious. But it'll be resolved. You're the alpha after all." I didn't add the last bit because there was no way in hell he wouldn't misinterpret me. He might think that I was mocking him. I'd rather not get even more written in black ink. He didn't say anything, but I could feel the weight of his stare before he eventually looked away to sip at his wine again. The silence was comfortable, even if there was a monster in the room. I didn't want to talk about what had happened between us the last time, neither did I feel it appropriate to talk about it. "Thank you," I blurted out again, mentally face-palming. He turned to look at me, raising one brow. "For what?" "Everything, the last time at the study." "I do not entertain crap like that. So, if that makes you feel special, I'd rather you didn't. It wasn't an act of kindness." "I know, but that isn't the only thing I'm thankful for." His brows were now sitting in furrows, looking intently at me. I coughed out in discomfort, shifting my weight and clearing my throat. "You know, I've had a difficult life too," I continued. "Down to the point where I always thought that every damn day was going to be my last. Like the day I found you in the woods." I nodded in affirmation. That day, I genuinely hoped it would be my last. But somehow, I don't see it like that. That's why I'm thankful to you. Even though you enjoy putting me through hell, I still have a roof over my head." I heard him scoff while I smiled to myself and thought. "You talk as if you've had it the hardest. What kind of life did you live then?" My lips froze at the question. The kind of life I led? The one of affluence and happiness with my family, or the one where I was made to suffer and watch my stepsister sleep with my husband? The one where I was publicly rejected and humiliated for what I had idea about? Sold as a pathetic sex slave? Or beaten by the people I thought of as family? Whichever way, I couldn't answer his question. Neither could I let myself slip and cry in front of him for no reason. I forced myself to smile back instead. "It's been a difficult one, that's all I can say." That was all I could say. I cleared my throat and blinked before looking back at him. He was staring right back without uttering a word. I couldn't break eye contact either, it almost felt like he was staring into my soul, exciting my wolf in small volts of electricity. He took a few steps in my direction, closing the already small distance between us. His stare didn't falter, however. I saw his pupils dilate and the silver bands around his irises intensify. There was a subtle flash in his eyes that I certainly would have missed if his eyes weren't so enchanting. Although his eyes had taken a form that I couldn't comprehend, I still couldn't read his expression. What did he want? Who was he behind his coldness? From the way he'd spoken, I could see shards that I didn't understand. Before I could even process my own thoughts, I felt his hot breath on my face. It was exciting in all the wrong ways. I could feel my heart run a marathon in a second. It was thumping so loudly that it may have as well beat out of my chest. If he heard it, I was screwed. I dared not look up at him or open my eyes, afraid that I would break whatever delicate things were happening at the moment. Until I felt something soft gently graze my lips, just enough for me to catch it. A pair of arms snaked themselves around me, pulling me even closer before the soft feeling had returned to my lips. My brain was short-circuiting. Was this what it felt like to be kissed? If I thought the scent of grasses and woods were tantalizing to my nostrils, it tasted even better. But even more, I couldn't think straight. He was kissing me. Out here in the open. Why? What was going through his head? Melting right into the kiss, he tilted my head gently, giving me moths in my stomach. It was the first time. I didn't know how to respond to the intense rush I was feeling. I didn't even know if I was responding to his kiss right. But I could genuinely remain here forever. His breathing was slow and almost erratic as he continued to kiss me, but his sudden pull caused me to wince in surprise at the loss. He pulled away from me, his hands still sitting just above my hips and his eyes wide open. I met his eyes with confused ones of my own. What just happened? He cleared his throat awkwardly before clearing his throat and letting me go. If the feel of his lips on might bring euphoria to me, his eyes that looked at everything but me snapped me back to harsh reality. I struggled to stand straight, as my knees felt like jello all over again. Now I was the one avoiding his eyes. He regretted it. He did, for sure. And now I felt like a fool for letting him kiss me for no reason. Toyed with, who the fuck did he think he was to treat me this way every bloody time? Get back to work. He finally spoke up as though nothing had even happened. My eyes widened watching him down the red liquid in his glass. And with that, he turned on his heels and walked away. I felt tears, hot, confused tears well up in my eyes. Here I was, setting myself up to be treated like shit all over again. He was the worst. I wiped my eyes in a futile bid to stop myself from crying. And I fell to my knees still in tears, letting myself sob quietly. I hated him, but he'd already ignited a flame that I didn't know how to quench.